It is my great pleasure to welcome for today's seminar in our colloquium Keith Williams, Andrée-Anne Be, and Laura Pustarfi. I invited them to speak here today because they published this article, which is very recent, came out this year, and I was really excited when I read it because it starts building a bridge between many Western concepts of psychedelic use for healing and indigenous uses. So it unpacks and works especially with this concept of inner healing intelligence and examines its dimensions and how we could actually make it more applicable for a wider use, especially also in ecological terms, and reading it from an indigenous lens of working with psychedelic experiences and what it means. So let me introduce the three authors. Thank you for coming. I know the time is, especially for Laura, really difficult, 7 o'clock in the morning in California. So thank you for getting up so early, looking so perfect. Keith Williams is an assistant professor in the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University. He gardens and swims in the powerful tidal environment of the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. His work focuses on better understanding how to be in good relations with our more than human kin. He draws heavily on post-human and indigenous thought, as well as lived experiences with family members, human and otherwise. Although he does not identify as indigenous, he has paternal ancestry from a Haudenosaunee community in the northern shores of Lake Ontario, and he respects and values Haudenosaunee teachings and traditional life ways. Andrée-Anne Be lives with her family in beautiful Mi'kma'ki by the Northumberland Strait in Nova Scotia. She is a traditional Western herbalist, clinician by training, and educator at heart. For several years, she operated a small herbal clinic within a doctor's office and has recently shifted her focus to managing the Indigenous midwifery program in development at FNTI, an Indigenous institute located in Tyendinaga, Mohawk Territory. Currently pursuing interdisciplinary graduate studies, Andrée-Anne's research explores the generative potential of experiential learning, decolonial pedagogies, and relational ethics in the teaching and learning of herbal medicine within community-based contexts. A mother of 3, she finds grounding in hiking, sleeping outdoors, and community engagement, and is known among friends and family for her curiosity, kindness, and reflective nature. Laura Pustarfi is a lecturer in philosophy and religion and director of the Psychedelic Certificate Program at CIIS. She teaches in both the Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion program, as well as in the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program. Her scholarly work examines trees and plants in Western thought, with particular focus on an arboreal and vegetal ontology and ethics that respects plants themselves. Her professional background includes events in project management, research analysis, and writing for both business and nonprofit organizations. As the director of the Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies and Research Certificate Program, she manages communications, educational and technological administration, and certificate program operations. She is co-editor with David Macaulay of the volume The Wisdom of Trees, Thinking Through Arboreality, published with SUNY in June 2025, and has presented at many academic conferences nationally and internationally. She is on board of the Plant Initiative and associate editor of the Perspectives Journal, and she also has an enduring interest in the arts. Thank you, all 3 of you, for coming. And we look forward to your presentation and then to a lively discussion of these ideas about how psychedelics and inner healing can grow into an ecological and indigenously informed perspective. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that lovely introduction, and it is such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to take a I need to share my screen, so I need to okay, now multiple presenters can share. Okay. How does this look to everyone? Is this can you see my screen? Okay, great. Okay, so Yeah, as I said, it's both a pleasure and an honor to be here. We're all really impressed and inspired by your work, Christine, and it just I'm so pleased. So thank you so much. Um, Inner healing intelligence is a core concept in psychedelic-assisted therapy that leverages the idea that all living beings have this innate tendency to move towards healing or wholeness. And personally, I noticed years ago that this fundamental or core concept, it's minimally articulated in psychedelic-assisted therapy manuals, books, papers, and even in training programs. The most that one typically sees is a paragraph that loosely describes, with very minimal detail, the definition that I just shared a moment ago. In the paper that we wrote, we conceptualize inner healing intelligence as the innate capacity of an individual to move towards healing by engaging with the vital life force of existence, specific to place and intrinsic to the myriad more than human relationships that constitute the extended self. Rather than presenting a prescriptive framework, our aim in this paper and in this presentation is really to invite all of you to take inner healing intelligence seriously and to imaginatively explore the implications of this expanded view. So I guess the motivation to do this work really stemmed from what we perceived as a missed opportunity to deepen our collective understanding of inner healing intelligence at a minimum for the benefit of all those people who engage in psychedelic-assisted therapy and for the medicines that they and we use. This theoretical intervention draws on critical vitalism, posthumanism, and also Indigenous thought. And just as a note to Laura and Andrée-Anne, I'll be the slide master. So when it's time to switch slides, just let me know, and I can do that when you're speaking. And this is a flowering peyote, which is just a lovely little plant. I grow a number of them from seed. Part of that relationship building process. Okay, there we go. My apologies for this slide. It's a little bit boggling. So the Western world is experiencing a resurgence of interest in the therapeutic potential of psychedelics, in part due to a loosening of legal restrictions on clinical research with these compounds. Numerous companies and individuals are profiting and otherwise benefiting from speculative investments, the lucrative lecture circuit, costly retreat centers, and of course from the psychedelic experience itself, with few, if any, benefits accruing to Indigenous peoples. In this way and more, the so-called psychedelic Renaissance reproduces the imperialism that fueled its eponym, the European Renaissance. I bring all of this up because there's a lot of erasure and tokenization of the Indigenous and local roots of psychedelic healing. I hope that our work can, among other things, help to recenter the ancestral understandings that are foundational to our field. And with that, I will pass it over to Laura.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you for having us. So I will be speaking about the modern Western clinical approach to inner healing intelligence, as well as some critiques. And much of my research focuses on the Western perspective because that's my own personal and intellectual lineage. And I'd also just like to acknowledge, as Christine mentioned, I'm joining you from about an hour north of San Francisco in Sonoma County, California, which is traditional Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok territory here. The psychologist Stanislav Grof is largely credited with developing the term inner healing intelligence, as it's often used within psychedelic-assisted therapies. His career started in what is now the Czech Republic, where he was able to work legally with LSD. And he then moved to the United States, where he conducted some of the last legal research into LSD in Maryland. He was also a founder of transpersonal psychology, a term which he coined, and he also developed perinatal psychology, though we will not have time to discuss either of those topics today. Groff coined the term holotropic, meaning an orientation toward wholeness, which we'll talk more about wholeness throughout our presentation. And that word comes from holos, the Greek for whole, and tropin, the Greek for moving towards. And in his work, he relates this term to heliotropism, which is the growth and motion of plants toward the sun. And this is an interesting connection when we talk later about ecology as an expanded way of looking at inner healing intelligence. So he and his wife at the time, Christina Groff, developed holotropic breathwork, which is now Groff breathwork. This is a method of altered breathing, hyperventilation, with the support of facilitators as part of a way of evoking what he called a non-ordinary state of consciousness. So this is similar to the experience with a psychedelic substance, and it's a way of experiencing these states of consciousness without a substance at all, just with the breath. So after Groff was no longer legally able to work on his LSD research in the United States, this breathing method allowed him to continue his work on consciousness and the expanded mind. Stan's work was hugely influential to the current model of clinical psychedelic-assisted therapy, and I want to acknowledge that it's not without critique. And we'll discuss some of the critiques of inner healing intelligence in particular in just a few minutes. I found it very interesting to trace Groff's thought in his writings. And one of his early mentions of an inner direction is in his book, LSD Psychotherapy, which was published in 1980. And he talks there about introspection as well as an inner process, specifically in regards to healing. And then starting in the 90s, both he and his wife, Christina, used terminology like inner healer or inner radar in their writing. Christina Groff wrote beautifully in her work of the inner healer as this depth of wisdom and a power of identity that's spiritual in nature. And this focus on inner work acknowledged the healing potential of each person, each individual, and thus that each person can be active in their own psychological healing. He pointed to Jung and especially the idea of healing as catalyzed by the collective unconscious as an inspirational frame. And then by the late 90s, Groff was using the terms healing intelligence as well as inner healer. And then he used this term, inner healing intelligence, in his book, The Transpersonal Vision. So that's where this quote on the slide comes from, this book, The Transpersonal Vision, in 1998. And Groff says, "The therapist is charged with supporting the experiential process with full trust in its healing nature and without trying to direct or change it. This process is guided by the client's own inner healing intelligence. It's important that the therapist support the experiential unfolding, even if he or she does not rationally understand it." And Groff continued to refer to inner healing throughout his writings, though less so in his later writings. And important to this way of approaching another individual is respect for the client or the participant, and trust on the part of the facilitator or the therapist. And I want to acknowledge that most other uses of inner healing intelligence follow this definition, and as the concept is mobilized within psychedelic-assisted therapy. Inner healing intelligence was a key researcher skill. It's a therapeutic methodology, especially for some of the early MDMA trials for PTSD in the US. Those are the FDA-approved trials. And the MDMA treatment manual defines inner healing intelligence as the innate capacity to heal from trauma. Keith mentioned training just briefly as well. Inner healing intelligence is part of the training for psychedelic-assisted therapists and facilitators. In particular, Dr. Janice Phelps, who's the founder and director of the certificate program that I'm a part of at CIIS, highlights inner wisdom as part of one of the core therapist competencies that she developed of trust enhancement. And she also notes that this inner healing can not only be part of a process of trust in oneself, but part of a process of trust in life as well. And then we also want to note that anthropologist Michael Winkelmann suggested that perhaps the disinhibition of dopamine that occurs in some psychedelic sessions might be connected to the brain's functioning and the brain's intelligences and somehow related to inner healing intelligence from that perspective as well. And moving on to some critiques of inner healing intelligence, the concept has been critiqued both from outside of the field as well as from within. As Keith mentioned, the term has not been well defined. That's the primary critique and something that we're trying to remedy in our paper. And such a diffuse concept is very difficult to test in clinical settings. There's not an objective measure for this kind of inner wisdom. And perhaps a phenomenologically based or qualitative approach, as we mentioned in the recommendations, might give more insight, but still wouldn't meet the empirical demands of some of the critics. Another critique is that inner healing intelligence might put pressure on the client or patient, and they might feel personally responsible if the outcome of the treatment does not turn out so well, or if the treatment outcome is poor, as if their inner healer was not effective or not working properly. And then also others have critiqued inner healing intelligence for influencing consent practices as well. And while it's important to recognize these critiques and address them, it's also important to recognize the potential power of a concept like inner healing intelligence that deserves more scholarly attention. We are interested in both further articulating inner healing intelligence, as Keith mentioned, and broadening the possibility of healing intelligence beyond just the individual human to include ecological others, more than human beings. And so more than human beings may include plants, fungi, animals, others, and especially those that are local to the person who is in search of healing. Healing is not only an individual event within one psyche. Healing is situated within a human body, surrounded by a web of interconnections between the facilitator, other humans, trees, plants, birds, animals, water, landscapes, and ultimately, well, we would say the ecology of the planet. And the hope is that this in particular, along with the vitalist and indigenous roots that my colleagues will discuss, is a way of taking inner healing intelligence forward, both personally and on a planetary level as well. I'll pass it on to Andrée-Anne.
Thank you, Laura. So I will be, as part of this discussion here, I'll be offering a summary of critical vitalism, the orienting concept we are working with to situate inner healing intelligence in a broader web of complexity. So vitalism is notoriously difficult to define, but it can be broadly understood as an existential attitude affirming the irreducible nature of life. So across time and traditions, vitalism has expressed the intuition that life cannot be fully captured by mechanistic explanations, that there is always something more, an excess of sort at the heart of being alive. So vitalist thought revolves around three key intuitions. First of all, the irreducibility of life, as mentioned. Second intuition is this indeterminate nature of existence, the way in which life and nature unfolds in open-ended ways, in unpredictable ways. That's the whole field of complex system science. And the third intuition pertaining to vitalist thought has to do with the mutually constitutive relationship between living and knowing. So modern vitalists argue that knowing is not separate from life itself, but rather is a mode of living, an embodied, dynamic, and relational process. So this philosophical position emerged in modernity in the 18th and 19th century Euro-Western thought as a critique of mechanistic science. Vitalism in this way arose as a protest against the view that living beings can be reduced to, and I quote Pregoning and Stenger here, living beings can be reduced to peaceful mechanisms in the quiet unfolding of universal laws. In other words, vitalist thought challenges the hegemony of positivist science for its inability to grasp the generative, creative, and unpredictable aspects of living systems. Monica Greco, a critical theorist working at the intersection of social science and medical history, described vitalism as a remedy for an excess of life within respect to the scope of positive knowledge. So this excess signals that life always surpasses what science can know or measure. Vitalism, as such, is not a doctrine opposed to science, at least from our perspective, but a philosophical stance reminding us of the limits of a reductive science or low context science, an invitation to engage with mystery rather than reduce. So, although the term vitalism was formalized in 18th century Western philosophy, the idea of a vital force is far older and widespread across cultures. Ancient medical and cosmological systems all posit that life is animated by an invisible organizing intelligence that sustains health and connects the living world. Modern healing systems have inherited this idea in updated forms and sometimes with questionable coherence with the broader theoretical web organizing their practices. And I can say that it is the case of Western herbal medicine, which I practice and I'm a student of. So, for example, chiropractic philosophy speaks of universal intelligence. Naturopathy and Western herbal medicine invokes the healing power of nature, and psychedelic-assisted therapy refers to inner healing intelligence. All principles suggesting that healing arises from within as part of life's innate self-organizing capacity. Though the language has shifted through time, these systems share the assumption that healing involves aligning with life's inherent intelligence rather than imposing external control on it. So, as you might be aware, vitalism has long been maligned within Western science. Critiques have dismissed it as unscientific, mystical, or even nihilistic, claiming that it lacks empirical rigor or explanatory power. However, proponents of vitalism argue that dismissing the concept reveals deeper epistemological blindness, a refusal to acknowledge what remains unknown or potentially unknowable. So, as Bergson and his Bergsonian followers contend, admitting the existence of a vital principle might be more intellectually honest than ignoring the ignorance that reductionist science perpetuates. We position ourselves a little bit in the middle of that argument and adopt a critical vitalist stance. And this critical vitalism moves beyond earlier notions of life as a fixed essence or singular substance. Instead, critical vitalism redefines life as a process, a continuous unfolding, a becoming, an interrelation, well fitted within the new materialism current of thought. It argues for critical vitalism and showing its embrace. Critical vitalism argue for an embrace of an ontology of immanence. So life in this framework is not an object, but a tension, a dynamic interplay between forces that are at once material and conceptual, are material and affective. So this newer strand of vitalism is non-anthropocentric, recognizes all forms of life as open-ended and co-creative. Human life is one expression among many in an ever-evolving web of vitality. As an emergent phenomenon, life exists in the relational flux between bodies, between environments and processes. The work of several scholars cited in our article emphasizes this relational ontology. Living and knowing are inseparable acts of becoming. So as a social theory, critical vitalism takes a pathic stance, That is, it centers on the vulnerability and struggle of life as it persists against death. It posits that the living world is not static, but rather always negotiating its conditions of existence. This relational view encourages an understanding of body and environment as codependent, where healing and transformation emerges through interaction and responsiveness rather than through external intervention. So engaging with vitalist thought in this way, rather than seeking to make it conform to scientific norms, open rich ethical and philosophical possibilities. Critical vitalism enables us to rethink the values underpinning health, knowledge, and care, especially when confronting modern crises of meaning, ecology, and embodiment. So in conclusion, vitalism operates in the liminal spaces of science, at the thresholds of what is recognized as legitimate knowledge. It challenges the boundaries between science and philosophy, between what is known and what is felt or experienced. This liminality makes vitalism particularly relevant for concepts like inner healing intelligence in psychedelic-assisted therapy. As social scientist, Tessène Nourani explains, inner healing intelligence in this context refers to a self-organizing, innate drive towards healing and wholeness that manifests during therapeutic process. It suggests that healing arises not from external correction, but from within the organism's own intelligence, a vital principle consistent with ancient and cross-cultural understandings of life force. So vitalism in this way stands not as an alternative to science again, but as a necessary complement, an ethical and ontological reminder that life always exceeds our attempts to define or control it. Through the lens of inner healing intelligence, we hope to reclaim vitalism as both a philosophical orientation and a practical guide to understanding the process by which living beings heal, evolve, and know themselves. Yeah, I will let you continue, Keith.
Hey, thank you, Andrée-Anne. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Indigenous vitalism, including in plant medicine traditions, is spiritual in nature, and from my understanding, that vital life force is drawn on for the continuance of life and the well-being of individuals, communities, and the entire world. And when I say those things, I include the that what Western science might refer to as non-living or inanimate even. So for example, the Wirarika of northern Mexico make pilgrimages to Wirikuta, the sacred desert, where they conduct ceremonial activities with hikuri or peyote too. And this is a quotation from Hope McLean's brilliant 2012 monograph, recreate the world, ensuring that the sun continues to rise, the rain to fall, and guaranteeing that people, animals, and crops enjoy good health. This is similar to the Acoma Puebloan ceremonial activities that ensure peaceful coexistence, abundance, and plentiful rain. And those are just two examples. There's something I just love about the generosity inherent in these ceremonial activities. And I think personally, we would probably all do well to engage in more of that. And like I said, there are so many more examples, but those are two good ones. Linguist Simon Cowell's work among the Northern Arapaho led to the understanding that a person is sacred and powerful because that person literally has within them or has access to power derived from the natural world or from the ancestors, both of whom mediate the general more than human power of the creator, which is immanent to the world. In Haudenosaunee culture, which is in Haudenosaunee culture, this kind of distributed power is known as Gasat Stensera, or the vital life force of creation. Gasat Stensera, also called continuance, is the power of the collective and the strength that comes from thought and action unified with all of creation and with the cycles of life. And I take that understanding from work with my own elders and also learning from the written words of Oneida elder Bob Antone. Aligning with the flows of this distributed power, among other things, allows for healing to take place in alliance with the more than human, including territory. So, oh, and I should say this is tobacco, Nicotiana rustica on the slide. That's I try to grow tobacco every year, and that's the same tobacco that folks use in Mexico and in South America, but it's also the same species is a traditional sacred tobacco here on Turtle Island or North America. Okay, so more than human power is indexed to place and sustained through ceremony and other activities that strengthen our human relationships with the rest of creation. Keith Basso, in his brilliant book, Wisdom Sits in Places, described how places hold axiological significance for the Western Apache who use place names to reinforce moral teachings through storytelling. And that same moral landscape appears in Leslie Marmon Silko's fiction, notably in her novel Ceremony, which I highly recommend. It's a beautiful book, actually. I typically have 2 or 3 copies here at home to give to people. And so in that book, Ceremony, the main character, Teo, who's a Laguna Puebloan suffering from PTSD from World War II, travels through the Puebloan landscape to recover the practice of place naming in order to restore his spiritual relationship with the land and his own internal cognitive landscape in alignment with territory. Teo's movement through the landscape is essentially, it's a healing journey, and movement is central to distributed or more than human power. I've written a little bit about movement and Indigenous ontology with Suzanne Brandt in prior publications. For the Haudenosaunee, flux is central to existence. For instance, the wooden table that I'm sitting at here in front of me, it's composed of all the interactions that wood had as a tree in the forest, as lumber in the yard, as an office table, and eventually as decomposing organic matter in the landfill. And for anyone who's worked in the psychedelic-assisted therapy field, you know, you'll recognize that in that atemporality or circular temporality as one of the gifts of psychedelic medicine. So things from the past can come up and be very real today, as real as they were, if not even more real than they were when they originally happened. And that permits us the opportunity then to go in and work with those traumatic events and try to disentangle them from the narratives that we've assigned them. Where was I? Right, yeah, so the table is composed of all the interactions that the wood had as a tree in the forest, as lumber in the yard, as an office table, and eventually as decomposing organic matter in the landfill. A corollary of this understanding is that if you restrict movement, you restrict life. Movement in the form of vibrational dynamism is important for psychedelic healing. For instance, among the Shipibo-Kunibo, the healing songs associated with ayahuasca ceremonies, known as Raubua or Icaros in Quechua, play a central role in the therapeutic process, according to our friend and colleague Pedro Favarón. And incidentally, Andrée-Anne and I just had an article accepted with Pedro in the Journal of Psychedelic Studies on, I think we're calling it like a Shipibo philosophical anthropological challenge to the crisis of Western universalism, something along those lines. But that should be coming out sometime within the next few months, I hope. But yeah, so those songs and that sonicity plays a central role in the therapeutic process, and that's also the case for other Amazonian indigenous groups and mestizo groups. The Shipibo-Kunibo songs have the capacity to heal because in Shipibo thought, that vibration or sonicity, it resonates with the vibratory nature of reality, both sensible and supersensible. These understandings around dynamism and flux provide a rationale following indigenous logic for the non-directive approach typically favored in contemporary psychedelic-assisted therapy. Okay, so a recent article by Pale et al. In 2024 asks whether, and this is a quotation, Inner healing refers to a legitimate mechanistic component of psychedelic therapy, or is it an example of myth-making exploiting the role of known priming and expectation in shaping psychotherapy outcomes? I'd love to do a critical discourse analysis on that. Actually, that'd be really good. So there's so much to unpack in that quotation. This rigid binary may render obscure the long-established understanding that the act of healing is a subjective phenomenon contingent on influences beyond the mechanistic and material. Placebo effect, for example, is testimony to the entanglement of mechanistic healing and the fundamental influences of meaning-making in the healing process. Rather than taking an either-or approach, we suggest that inner healing intelligence operates within the complex semiotic field that includes the symbolic in the individual, social, and arguably ecological construction of meaning. This understanding does not exclude the possibility that inner healing intelligence also possesses a mechanistic basis, as Andrée-Anne said earlier, nor does it exclude the prospect following Indigenous thought that inner healing intelligence extends beyond the human to include the rest of the more than human and even entire ecosystems. Inner healing intelligence, based on the theoretical work that we've presented, describes the innate capacity of every individual to heal by engaging with the vital life force of existence, specific to place and intrinsic to the multitude of more than human relationships that constitute our extended selves. So I'd like to take a few minutes to conclude by offering some thoughts regarding potential next steps around either deepening our understanding of inner healing intelligence or applying inner healing intelligence more broadly. So the first one is healing and movements towards healing in general can be potentiated by attending to emplaced and relational affective flows. In a co-authored article from 2022, Janice Phelps from CIIS asserts that, and this is a quotation from her article, trust in this inner healing intelligence can ultimately give way to a trust in the process of life. I think that's so beautiful. The reverse formulation, an emplaced and relational understanding of and trust in the process of life, can ultimately give way to a trust in our own innate tendency to move towards healing. That also has much to offer psychedelic-assisted therapy practitioners and anyone involved in healing, to be honest. And so this notion is supported by several recent studies that we quoted in our paper, or cited in our paper, that reveal an increased sense of nature relatedness as a result of psychedelic use. We suspect that the relationship between healing and the alliance with the more than human is reciprocal rather than unidirectional, and that encouraging the development and attunement of the patient or client to the affective flows of the world within and around them can further support the client or patient's sense of belonging to the broader web of life and their own innate healing capacity. Conceptualizing research on inner healing intelligence and healing more broadly from a place of vital curiosity can open up the way for recasting psychedelic-assisted therapy within a meaning-making framework, where therapy serves the body's, this is a quotation from De Paulo and De Jager, 2022, serves the body's open-ended process of self-constitution. Adopting a vitalist attitude that centers vital needs, those fundamental attributes that support the continuation of life, focuses on removing obstacles to a person's vital needs in their embrace of the unfolding of life's process, rather than seeking to fix assumed deficits or deficiencies within the body. Vital needs represent more than what keeps the living alive, but rather are those conditions that make lives livable. And that's taken from Butler and Worms 2023. And that is, for me, that is so powerful. So the third, the attunement to inner healing intelligence, based on the perspective developed in this paper, may serve to better understand the role of metaphor in psychedelic-assisted therapy and in medicine more broadly. Inner healing intelligence may be understood as a metaphor, referencing the regenerative processes of life in the world, the embodiments of the forms and patterns of the world as moving towards healing. Metaphoric thought, as Jan Zwicky says, echoes the shape of the world. and as such is laden with world-making potency. Tua scholar Gregory Kahiti explains that thought that guides our actions and comprises our contemplation must be understood as the part of the dynamic expression of the physical as well as the metaphorical air animating all nature. Metaphors and their inherent role in self-constitution, their relational capacity in enabling identification with, and their world-making potential should be valued in medicine and in psychedelic-assisted therapy, more specifically. Incorporating vitalist metaphors in psychedelic healing, either in place of or in addition to mechanistic metaphors, will, we suggest, enrich psychedelic-assisted therapy and could contribute to both healing people and place. An expanded view of inner healing intelligence beyond the bounds of the human psyche may lead to further understanding of ethical relationships between humans and the more than human. Philosopher Quentin Yarnaud asks, from a relational perspective of plant ethics, the question is not what moral status do plants have, but what do they need and what can I do for them? I find those questions are so compelling. This is particularly salient when we consider the indigenous notions of plant teachers and allies, agentic persons that assume didactic and other supportive roles in the psychedelic healing process. And, for me, it really brings home the question, what can we do for these beings that do so much for us? And I would hope that we could all ask ourselves that question when we engage with these medicines and consider and respect their lives and their well-being and their aspirations. And the fifth and penultimate, a productive line of empirical and theoretical inquiry could reveal the implicit relationships between ego dissolution, mystical experiences, awe, and nature relatedness. There seems to be an unresolved relationship between ego dissolution, awe, mystical experiences, and nature relatedness in the context of the psychedelic experience. Critical vitalist and indigenous thought, including some of what we have shared in this paper, could help to further articulate the unclear relationships between these phenomena. And finally, qualitative interviews with relevant practitioners and participants regarding their experiences with inner healing intelligence will help to better understand how inner healing intelligence manifests in therapeutic contexts. So our work presents a conceptual exploration of inner healing intelligence, and if, as Shatsky suggests, practices are the source and carrier of meaning, language, and normativity, then understanding the richness and depth of lived experiences with inner healing intelligence could gesture towards possible junctures at which practice innovations could shift the conceptualization and enactment of inner healing intelligence to a more collective, emplaced, and embodied approach to healing. We envision and we wish for a reciprocally illuminative relationship between practice and theory. The divide is really artificial anyway. As we hopefully move towards a clearer understanding of the horizon of possibility for inner healing intelligence and towards a more collective, emplaced, and embodied healing. Thank you very much. That's us.